Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are joined today by Dr. Theresa Brough. I've known Theresa for over 4 years now. I met her through the bootcamp back in 2021, and since then, Theresa's been doing some really cool stuff. Earned her EDD, just recently defended it, so congrats on that. Theresa worked her way up at her organization, which is a retail furniture chain, and is like a senior director of people operations now. So worked up from doing the ID work to making a really big impact and doing a lot with without a huge instructional design and learning team. So I know some of us here might be in that same situation or might be anticipating we may be in that situation soon. So thanks for joining us, Theresa.
Thank you,
Um,
Devlin. I'm so excited to be here.
all right, we're glad to have you. We do have some questions for you all in the audience as well. We'd like to know a little bit more about like where you're at and where you're coming from. So I'm gonna share a poll with you all, and yeah, let us know where you're at in your career. So are you trying to make the transition into the field right now? Are you maybe already working in the field, or are you already managing people in the field? And maybe you can share some perspective as well. All right, it looks like over half of us are trying to make this transition. So this will be a solid session for you. Teresa's going to share some insights on how she did it. Um, so yeah, this will be great. And then if you are making the transition, what kind of role are you coming into the field from? Are you coming from teaching? Are you coming from higher ed? Or maybe something different altogether, and you can let us know in the chat. Yeah, Teresa came from education, and I know Teresa's passionate about helping people make that transition as well. Okay, nice range. Yeah, if you're coming from a different spot, can you let us know in the chat? Courtney did all three listed. Okay, well we nailed we nailed that one, Courtney. K-12 administration, nice. Mental health training coordinator. That'll be good experience. Cool. Mental health fields. Yeah, we got to add those to the list. All right, good. That gives us a solid idea. So let me look again. So about a third of the transitioners are coming from K-12 teaching, and then a lot of mental health and other education related fields. So perfect. So I guess my first question for you, Teresa, and just to let you all know, yeah, I'm going to ask Teresa 5 or 6 questions here, and then we'll turn it over to your questions. So if you want to make sure your question doesn't get missed, I recommend saving it to ask when we get to that portion because it can get lost in the chat. Okay, my first question for you, Teresa, is what you were doing before you became an instructional designer and why you decided to make the switch.
Okay, yeah. So I started out doing a few different things. I did a little bit of management, a little bit of accounting, but eventually I got into K through 12 teaching. And I spent about 5 years doing some elementary, some high school, and I loved it. I loved teaching. I loved especially the design aspect of it and engaging with the students. But if you're a K-12 teacher, you know that's not the whole job. There are a lot of other things that go along with teaching that don't involve the actual instruction. And there are some parts of that that I didn't enjoy as much as the design aspect and the engagement aspect. So I would say also that one of the things that was difficult for me is that I was very limited in the technology I could use. So when you're in a classroom teaching setting, you are limited by what technology the district supports or what's available to you in the classroom. And I really wanted to branch out into some other technology tools. And you just don't always have the option to do that. So that was one of the factors. I had also worked on some professional development sessions and really realized that I enjoyed teaching adults and loved designing instructions at the level of adult learning. And so that was one of the bigger factors that helped me decide to switch.
Okay, nice. Yeah, can anyone in the education space relate to that journey? I feel like, yeah, a lot of teachers I've talked to find themselves in a similar position. Yeah. Nice. Got some thumbs up, hands raised in the chat. Some absolutely. So yeah, and yeah, being able to, well, I won't give any spoilers. I want to hear it from you, Teresa. How did you wind up landing that first ID role, and what do you think helped you stand out or secure the role?
Well, I think that I can have to give a lot of kudos to you because your boot camp was the first instruction I had when I was really searching and exploring for a way to take teaching skills and transition them into instructional design skills. So that experience was where I learned what technology tools do people use in this industry and what are some things that businesses look for, and it was a really good introduction. So learning some of those technology tools gave me a big advantage. And I will say for the interview, I was able to build a demo to solve not just a hypothetical, but a realistic problem that they would have with the course, and then also make a job aid for that. So I think that helped as well. Um, I think too, when you're going into this type of interview, especially if you've been in the teaching field for a long time, you have to really think deeply about what the company's needs are and how you can meet them, and then be able to explain them, but not in teacher terms. So, for example, there's a lot of skills that I had as a teacher, a lot of instructional design skills, communication skills, getting key stakeholders involved, like parents. But I had to be able to explain that in the interview in terms that the business leaders could understand. So it was just a matter of really sitting down and considering what are the problems I can solve for this company.
Nice. I'm sure there might be some questions about how you did that, how you prepped for that, how you translated those terms. But I know we have people here too who want to hear about your experience on the job. So maybe we'll save that for the end if people are curious about that. But yeah, a lot of good stuff there. A lot of stuff I'm sure the educators in the audience can relate to. Um, but yeah, so you got the job. Whatever you did, it definitely worked. I don't even think you had finished your portfolio at the time, right? You just like
I was about halfway
about
halfway
halfway and
finished.
still landed the role.
Yeah.
Okay, so you landed the role, and now, if I'm not mistaken, you were like the sole learning person at your company. You were the one who needed to design these learning solutions. How did you even start to approach building a learning program from scratch? And if you can share any other details about it, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, I would say it definitely was overwhelming at first, knowing that it wasn't that learning wasn't happening, it was just that there wasn't a lot of structure. So coming in, the biggest thing that I knew I needed to accomplish was to, number one, get to know the leaders of the departments. What were their pain points? What are some things that they wanted to accomplish training wise? Getting to know the values and the culture of the company, because all of that determines how you prioritize. So at the beginning, I had a lot of requests, a lot of different requests. And so prioritizing was super important as far as what is the most critical, what will make the most impact, and what can we accomplish, that's going to get the ball rolling. And so as I was doing that, the best way that I could gather that information was really just talk to people and ask questions. And so I did a lot of meetings, a lot of just inquiry, before making any decisions as to what we were going to focus on and what programs we're going to roll out first. I think too, at the beginning, it was a matter of considering a balance between, we needed to hold people accountable, so have some kind of a system in place to make sure people were completing the training that they were assigned, but also have some flexibility and some transparency where people could give feedback on the training and how well it was working for them and what I could do to make it better. And so we did, just so much communication, so much communication at the beginning, communicating with the managers, communicating with department heads, communicating with the frontline employees, and lots of feedback surveys were key as well. So once we would roll out a training, just getting some feedback from the people who took it and the managers of the people who took it to see how well it fit for the actual problem we were trying to solve.
Okay, nice. So you get brought on. It's like, okay, we have a learning person now, and someone who can design all this training we need. Requests are coming in from every direction, it sounds like. And then I get this vision of you like putting on your like detective hat and being like, okay, let before we dive into anything, let's figure out like where we can best put these resources. So you did a lot of
Yes.
interviews with, yeah, stakeholders. You, I'm guessing, worked with another stakeholder to kind of make those decisions, or was it all on you? Like you pick, like you, yeah,
I communicated with leadership a lot. So it
nice.
was, first of all, trying to understand what the processes were and what was actually happening now, and then coming up with some ways that I might be able to address that, but then also running it by just the key leadership in those positions.
Nice. Okay. Okay, I mean, I feel like I could ask you questions about this for an hour. It's just hearing about like what it was like in the weeds, making this happen. But okay, so you were able to do some prioritization and then started rolling out some trainings, like highest impact ones first. And then
Yes.
after you rolled them out, really making sure you got that feedback to measure the performance, right? How are the people receiving it? How are the managers feeling about performance? Maybe there are some metrics or, other impacts looked at there to see how effective it was. Great. Okay. Um, what was the biggest challenge doing something
I
like
mean,
this and getting this off the ground?
I would say the thing that took the most time was just building relationships and building trust and rapport with the people that I needed feedback from the most. That's just a normal human thing that
Hmm.
it takes a lot of time to build that rapport. Um, but then also really understanding the current process and why it's happening. So, for example, you might look at a process that's in place now and think to yourself, why are they doing it this way? This doesn't seem to make sense. But having enough humility to say, okay, they're doing it this way for a reason. So I need to understand what that reason is because they're
Hmm.
probably trying to solve some kind of problem. And if I can figure out what problem they're trying to solve, maybe we can approach it in a different way. But if I just kind of gloss over that, it's not going to be received well. You're going to get hits to your credibility, which I mean, I'll fully admit that there are moments like that I had in the beginning where I didn't think something was as critical as it was. And it wasn't until I later that I realized that I should have taken it more seriously. So I
Mm.
think there's a lot of kind of check your ego at the door too, just to ask a lot of questions and start with that before making judgments about what's happening now.
Nice. Yeah, that's really valuable. I mean, everyone in the field can kind of relate to this frustration. It's like, I'm coming in, I'm the learning expert. Like, here's how we need to be doing this learning design. And if it's not like this textbook vision we have, it can be pretty frustrating.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like how you handle that. So instead of, getting frustrated and getting burnt out and maybe having to go hope it will be different somewhere else, which happens to a lot of people, you're like used all of this as evidence of, what the underlying issues and problems might be. And then, yeah, built trust instead of putting people on the defensive to find a collaborative solution to it that actually makes a difference, it sounds like.
And I'll tell you one of the other things that was kind of a turning point for me. And it wasn't that I didn't know this, but I didn't realize the impact until later. And that's that people learn best when they're making connections with each other. So
Hmm.
when I finally got to the point where I was not just having people complete the learning, but having them complete the learning and then, for example, go talk about that content with their manager or talk about that content with a peer group or to share something that they learned with a larger group. Those moments really changed how people viewed the learning and also made it stick in different ways
Mm.
than I kind of underestimated that, I would say, at the beginning.
Is that something that you designed for, or was it just happening organically with these conversations around the learning?
I really had to design for it. It was
Hmm.
something that I kind of did it once and realized that it was a big deal. And so after that, I tried to build in those opportunities as much as I could. And each time you could see clear benefits, and people's relationships with each other got stronger as well.
And it sounds like you must have had a lot of trust to get managers and everyone on board with devoting time to this, to having these conversations. So. Um,
Definitely. That took some
so
time.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, what does that look like for people, right? Like relationship building. I mean, you gave us one example, like, not kind of going in and criticizing everything and trying to you be more curious about why things are the way they are. What else does this relationship building look like? Is it like hanging out in the break room, like getting coffee together, collaborating
Sometimes,
on
hey,
projects?
sometimes, yeah. I think that I think there is an element to it where you build a lot of strong relationships when you're not necessarily talking about work, when you're just
Yeah.
spending time and getting curious about the person.
Hmm.
And then that can lead into more conversations about what's important to them in their role, what's important to them in their department. I think asking values based questions is super important. Once you can get to that point in the relationship, um, the company, of course, has values as a whole, but then each leader within the company has values that are important to them with their team. And so knowing what that is and keeping that in mind as you're designing things really can guide what you highlight in your training, what is the most important, and then it helps them receive it better and help it be more aligned to their goals.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. Learn their values and let them know, hey, I've got the same goals here. I'm on your
Yeah,
side. I'm here to help.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Nice. Okay, that's really good to know. I like that approach. My next question for you is what skills did you have to develop on the job that you weren't quite expecting? Maybe it is related to this relationship building stuff, but
Relationship building, also, I would say change management.
Mhm.
So realizing, and this is, of course, trial and error because this was my first time in a role like this, but just realizing that you can develop the most perfect training offering, but if people aren't ready to receive it, then it's not going to work very well. So, kind of evaluating where people are in the process and not rolling out too much too soon, for a lot of reasons. I learned a lot of the value of, first of all, testing before you send anything out there, lots and lots of testing, but also soft rollouts where you roll out things to just a small group of people and get some feedback on whatever bugs or whatever feedback you can get from them, and then maybe a little bit larger, and then maybe to the entire group. Those type of things are really important because they help you work out the kinks, but they also help you evaluate how ready people are for the change. If especially in cases where you're changing your current process, where they've been doing something one way and now you're changing the way that they do it. That's super important to know where your audience is.
Yeah, I see. I've been in some orgs like on the ground in the break room when they're going through like a digital adoption change and people are just like so mad about it and just like just really just bad mouthing the change initiative. Is some of that like natural and to be expected, or is that evidence that maybe you do need to adjust your course in some way?
It could be either one. I would say that some of it is normal, but I think trying to not take it personally is very important so that you can look
Mhm.
at it honestly and say, is there something about this that I could adjust that would be better? Or is there something we can do next time to make it go a little bit more smooth? Did we get buy in from the right people before we started to make this change? I think is a really important thing. And if not, then what could we do to start those conversations with the right people early so that next time we
I
can get
see.
this along further? Because it can be a major barrier.
I see. Yeah. So more about having that open communication, being transparent about what's coming far enough in advance so that it doesn't feel like it's just dumped on people and they had no input.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. And then my final question, I see we already had some questions coming in from people who are transitioning, but what advice would you have for someone who is new, trying to break into the industry or, yeah, is about to start their first role or maybe just started?
I would say to, especially if you're building a portfolio or if you're building sample projects, to really think about what industry you might want to work in and think about some problems you might be able to solve. And maybe think about while you're designing, how can I design something that hits that nerve? that really lets the business leaders know that I'm in it to see it from their perspective, and I can actually make processes less painful for them, or I can just solve as many problems as I can. I think that's part of it. I would say too, as far as like people coming from the teaching field, there are so many teaching skills that apply, but no one in the business world knows those terms. So it's super important to translate that when you're interviewing or when you're communicating into terms that they do understand. So kind of researching that might be helpful. So like, for example, if you are in the classroom, your instruction is supposed to be aligned with state standards. Well, in an organization, you need to have your instruction aligned with the business goals, or what are the key metrics that they look at all the time. If you are communicating with parents, the purpose of you having those difficult conversations with parents is because both of you have a stake in the child's success. So in a business world, that might be something like you have some key stakeholders here that you need to align with your initiatives, or you may need to make sure that you're aligned with their initiatives. And it's the same kind of communication skills, just a different setting. Um, and this, I would say this is more geared towards any industry that has customers or clients. But for me, I found it very helpful to focus on the things that were the closest to impacting the customer first. So if we're looking at processes that we need to shift, or that we need to just make sure that our training is on point, that those are typically going to be the things that are the most customer facing or the most customer impact. And so when I was prioritizing, for example, if we have our frontline employees that are interacting with customers, we want to make sure that their behavior and their practices and their habits are the best it possibly can be, and then kind of go from there. So that was one of a priority for us.
So that was a priority for like how your org, like that's why you with your org and leadership's help decided to prioritize training, or are you saying like because you like did your background make you like uniquely like did you researching for roles where you could get that opportunity when you were looking for a job?
No, I wouldn't say I had that in mind ahead of time. I would say that one of the early things I did was to interview some of the senior leadership about the company's values. And so very, very quickly, I discovered that customer satisfaction was a huge deal to the company, which it is for most customer-facing companies. And so knowing that that was a top priority value, then that's what kind of drove the decision to prioritize training that impacted that the most.
Great. Okay, that's excellent. And yeah, I mean, imagine going into interviews, being able to talk about that and talk about how you want to bring value to support an organization's customers. I mean, that's going to go much further than talking about, teaching experience. Because yeah, being able
Right.
to bridge that gap from how you're supporting students or parents to how you're going to collaborate with stakeholders or support an organization's customers. Yeah, see how that
Yeah.
would make it a lot easier for someone to hire you.
Yes.
Um, well, let's turn it over to questions from the audience. Thanks for answering all of my questions. Hopefully that gives people a good range of the type of stuff that, we can talk about here. We've already got a couple. Jalen is asking if you have any book recommendations.
Oh man. Okay. So I read a lot of books about aligning instructional design with business goals. The titles escape me, but I can send them after if I need to. I would say another thing I did was just reading some books that had to do with leadership soft skills in general, because the things that I was teaching to managers and the things that I was teaching to customer service representatives, a lot of that had to do with how to connect with people, how to make a good impression on people. And so just because that was a big value for our organization, I started to read a lot of books on that topic, but I don't have any at the front of my mind at this moment.
Maybe you could send it over to us, we'll put it in the notes of the replay
Absolutely.
for
Yeah, I
people.
can do
I
that.
also just took off a stack of books from my little bookshelf behind me, and I can hold them up to the camera because some
Awesome.
of them definitely deal with the type of stuff we're talking about. So there we have it. That'll be in the replay. I don't know if you recognize any of those there, but some of those are quite good. Definitely helped me when I was first getting into the field and thinking I was going to be doing a lot more corporate change initiatives before I moved into the whole boot camp thing. Um, but cool, we'll add a lot of book recommendations in the notes of the replay. All right, I know Chris asked this question early. Do you think it's important to build a portfolio?
It's absolutely important. I would say that it is something that most hiring managers expect to see. Um, and I wouldn't say that it has to be super long. I think it's more just some, at least these are some of the things we talked about in our boot camp when I went through it years ago, was that it can be small examples, but it demonstrates that you do have some idea of the technical requirements, that you have a little bit of graphic design at least, and that you can design your training for a specific goal that's going to meet a need. And so those are things that you can say in an interview, but it's like a portfolio is worth 1,000 words. Them being able to actually view it is very impactful.
And you mentioned something earlier that I don't know if it was required or not, but that's always been like my secret trick for like closing clients as a freelancer. But you created some assets that were tailored for the company before you were even hired. Was that part of like
Yes.
an interview homework assignment, or did you take the initiative to do that to
It
stand
was,
out?
I'm trying to remember if they assigned it or if I just decided. I'm pretty sure that they asked for that
Mm,
at the time. And it was fairly short. It wasn't a long project at all.
mhm.
But I tried to incorporate what I knew about the company and some things that I felt could be important to them. And it went well. It went very well. And I think it was something that definitely helped to seal the deal.
Yeah. Yeah, that can definitely help. I've had some cases like that where I'll build a project with, with what I can learn about their company publicly with some assets from their site. I'll show it off to them. And if it doesn't help me land work, it always makes for a good portfolio piece. So,
Yes,
yeah, that's a
definitely.
nice approach. Cool. Thank you, Chris. All right. I have a question from Carrie. What are some questions you can ask to gradually gauge leadership values or maybe leadership's values and goals?
Well, the way that I started was to ask them about their stories. So I asked them about their history with the company, what roles have they held, what do they like about working for this company, um, what are some things that have changed over the years, and what are some things that will never change. I really like that question because you can draw out some things that are really core to central to the values of the company. Um, and you also just really get to know people, which is a fun exercise. But that's kind of how I started, was just kind of asking about personal stories and trying to draw out what was important to them and what's important to the company as a whole.
Great. Yeah, Carrie, feel free to ask any follow-up questions, but I think that's a great, yeah, more human approach than coming in with your list of like, what are our business goals and all of this. Like, I like the relational approach. Like, no, we're actually, starting to build some long-term relationships here to get some good stuff done together. Great.
Mhm.
What about the goals piece? Should we speak on that? Like, how are you learning what the organization's goals are? I mean, maybe it's those questions, but yeah.
I would say that was more when I dove into the department exploration phase. And so of course the company has goals, but each department has goals as well. And so
Hmm.
looking at, okay, in this department, if you could only pick three things, what would be the three things you want your team to accomplish? And you might even divide it into short term and long term. What are some things that you want them to accomplish? Or what behaviors do you want those employees to exhibit on a daily basis? Um, And then again, going back to pain points. So if there's something a that is frequently confusing or it's frequently a problem, that's a great place to start kind of diving into, would training actually solve this problem or make this problem better? And that was one of the main things that we dug into for each department as I went through.
Nice. Okay, good. So yeah, doing that textbook good idea approach. Not we're not throwing e-learning at everything out here. We're trying to make an actual impact, do some
Right.
analysis. So good stuff. All right, thanks for the question, Carrie. We have a question from Elizabeth. Do you have any sources on how to translate pedagogy terms to company or corporate terms? So it sounds like you had a lot of practice with it and have a lot of insights about it. Any
I
resources you
think
turn to for help?
didn't. I would say that the main thing I can tell you is that it was like a light bulb moment for me for each one. For example, when I got to really thinking about how difficult it was to do change management, a kind of a light bulb went off, and I thought, oh, it's like behavior management in the classroom. And when you really need to connect with students that are difficult to connect to, how would you approach that? And so when I was looking at the managers and how to communicate with them about soft skills and how to train their employees, lead their employees, was like, okay, well, this reminds me of the professional development workshops we did for teachers
Mhm.
and in the classroom. And so it just kind of fell together as I went through it. I could definitely see correlations as to all of these things that I did in the classroom, but just in a different setting. The heart of the skill was so similar.
Yeah, it seems like we could maybe even have done a workshop on like translating education terms into corporate terms, and that could be a whole workshop in and of itself.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I imagine AI might be able to help pretty well with that too. With a custom, we could
Yeah.
probably even make a custom GPT where it's like, tell me about what you're doing on the job as a teacher, and we'll talk about how that translates into a corporate environment. And I'm sure that could be some good inspiration. So that's an
Right.
idea, Elizabeth.
I love
But
that.
we could do more resources on that in the future for sure. Because yeah, I've seen people go through the job search from education once they start seeing all of that and making those connections, it really changes the game with the interviews. So
It does.
definitely can give you an advantage there.
Yeah.
All right, Carol is asking if hiring managers are looking for specific examples when you interview.
Um, so I guess let me ask a follow-up clarification question. Specific examples of like behavioral history or specific examples as in like a portfolio example or maybe both? Uh,
I was imagining portfolio. Oh yeah, portfolio. Carol said in the
Portfolio.
chat.
Um, for this particular one, what we discussed was to just design a short course so that they could see what one might look like for their business. And I know for every company, I feel like it's going to be a range as far as what
Mhm.
they're going to want and how intense and robust that might be. But I think something short and impactful that relates uniquely to them is the key there. It's just letting them know, giving them some kind of idea that if I imagine this person on board on my team, what is she going to accomplish for me, or what is he going to accomplish for me? And can they really understand what our needs are?
Mhm. Yeah, Carol, we try to do kind of like a catch-all, if you will, with like the flagship project where it shows off some like needs assessment, shows off some like storyboarding skills, the e-learning development with Storyline 360. We've done hiring manager interviews, and when it comes to the tech skills, Storyline 360 is always up there. When it comes to like what they're actually looking for, it's like, can this person solve real-world problems with their instructional design skills instead of just like make a pretty e-learning? So those are the two main things. But yeah, it's gonna range a lot from company to company, but those are like some common patterns. So we're like, show off, you create a storyline course that solves a real world problem is that e-learning makes sense as part of the solution and be able
Right.
to justify that in an interview. Um, but yeah, it could really depend on, of course. A good question. All right, we have a question from Elucigun. And let me know if I did mispronounce that. But are there materials that can prepare someone who is transitioning into the instructional design field?
I would say the biggest thing for me was Devlin's boot camp. As far as that goes, I'm sure there are lots of materials out there. There's lots of books out there, but I think that one of the bigger things for me was that I was able to create some things, and then other people were able to give me feedback on it. So it was the very first step for me was learning, okay, what technology tools are used in this field, and trying to dabble into those to see, okay, they're not as hard to learn as I thought they were. Let me see what I can do with them. But then if you're creating something and nobody's looking at it and nobody's giving you feedback, it's really hard to know if it's any good, if it's going to be something that other people are receptive to, that other people are engaged with. So that to me was the most important thing, is to just be able to actually get hands-on, practice those skills, and then once I practice those skills, get someone to look at it and give me objective feedback on it. That was huge for me.
Great. Yeah, the feedback definitely helps. I remember asking anyone who I could get their ear. I was like, can you look at my project?" Like all of my peers in my master's program, my partner at the time, I was constantly asking her to look at my stuff. But yeah, there's a ton of free resources out there online too. I have like 5 years worth of YouTube videos, most of which are aimed at helping people make that transition. And then, if you can build some connections with people in the field who are open to giving feedback, that might be a good way to do it too without investing in a whole like bootcamp program, for example. So yeah, I think we have a whole like become an instructional designer playlist. That might be a good place to start with on YouTube if you're looking for some free materials to dabble in. All right, great. A question from Vinesh. How do you do your research and come up with a program plan if the domain you're dealing in is different? For example, project managers. So Vanessa, I'm interpreting the question as like, say you're not a subject matter expert in this domain or you haven't held this role before. How do you come up with a plan for your training program? Is that your question? Yes. Okay.
Okay, that's a great question. And that was my whole life at the beginning, because I had not been in any of these departments before or worked in this industry before. And so I depended a lot on feedback sessions and question sessions with people who did have that expertise. So I will say that it was very important for me to go one department at a time and not take on too much. But once I was with the department and really identified who were the leaders in this department, what were their values, then it wasn't a big leap from that for them to give me information as far as what should the process be. A lot of times they do already have documentation, as far as at least on some level, as to what the process should look like. It just may be in a different format. It may just be in a text format, or it may just be in some kind of a job aid or something like that. And so taking those things and then going back to the leader and saying, okay, is this what you meant by this? Or can you define this term for me? Or what does this mean to a frontline employee? What should they be doing to make this happen? Those were the type of questions that I asked to make sure that when I'm putting it together, it made sense. And then, like I said before, with the soft rollout, before I even rolled it out to a small group of employees, I would roll it out to the manager and say, hey, look this over for me, make sure it makes sense. Is there anything you want to add? Is there anything that we should take away? Is there any way that we can make it more aligned with your goals? And so just a lot of back and forth with those subject matter experts was key. So it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of planning. And I would say the bulk of it is not necessarily the building. The bulk of it is the research and the communication and the feedback loops. So
Great. So yeah, so when you got hired, you weren't expected to be expert at every role across the organization. You're just expected to know how to help, turn what's in people's minds and what, the processes and what's happening at the company into a format that's friendly for helping people learn. So that's
yes.
kind of like how I think about it with the instructional designer. It's like you don't need to be the expert, you're probably not going to be expected to be that expert in every domain, but you need to know how to ask the right questions and be a really good learner yourself to learn what you need to know. So then you can then package it in a way that's good, helpful for helping other people learn.
I
Um,
will say this though, something interesting happens, especially in, I would say maybe a smaller type company. If you've been with the company for a while, because you are working with multiple departments, you start to see connections between the departments and how one process affects other people. And it
mm,
may be that you see things that the people in those individual departments don't see because you're seeing it from multiple angles. And that's where you really can bring some value, because you start to bridge those gaps where it may make sense in this area, it may make sense in this area, but it would make more sense if we collaborated and brought those two departments together with this process. So that's a really interesting things that tends to happen over time.
I mean, that's really powerful that you were able to do that. That's like the dream of like, when someone in this field can be the most effective. And I feel like that's what a lot of people say they want out of like their learning initiatives and stuff. It's like break down the silos. So
Yes.
that's really powerful. You're able to do that. Nice. Okay, great. Thanks for the question, Vinesh. Great question. We have a question from Rosie. What can you recommend to stand out and get noticed by hiring managers?
I feel like, since I've only done this once, this may be a more Devlin question. But I think that for me, it was just making sure that my interview and my communication was very centered on the organization. So not centered on me, not centered on my skills, but centered on them and centered on what they need. So for me, from the very beginning of the communication, trying to communicate how I could solve problems for them instead of just trying to communicate that I'm the best at these things,
Mhm.
um, is super important.
Yeah, yeah, I've talked, in so many other videos and stuff about, all the skills you can learn and the portfolio things you can do to stand out. But I think we'll leave it at Teresa's suggestion here, which is about contextualizing, yeah, how you can actually add value to that organization and make it a bit more personal. Maybe once you have those skills in that portfolio, that's going to really seal the deal for you. So I think you answered that perfectly. Um, all right. Abari's curious about what your first storyboard looked like and how long it took.
My first storyboard, I would say, was not very good, but I think it was very simple, um, but it helped me visualize how to get to the end goal and actually plan that out, because I did make the mistake on the first couple of things that I designed of kind of going through it with my whims. And it didn't end up like I liked it. And I also had to redo a lot of things, and I had to um, just start over and several times. Whereas when I took the time to storyboard, it helped me to have a plan to get where I was going and to decide that early on so that my steps made more sense. And it actually saved me a lot of time in the end. But I would just say that it was something that didn't necessarily come naturally to me as a teacher, because a lot of times we're developing a lot of content really, really fast. And so it doesn't necessarily go through the same thought process of when you're trying to develop something maybe a little bit more slowly, but it needs to be a little bit more, I guess, intentional is the right word. And so it it's a very important part of the process to help you stay on track and save time.
Nice. Yeah, I've been there too. My first projects, I would dive right into storyline. I'm building like full branching scenarios in storyline. Clients are requesting changes, and yeah, learned the value of storyboarding quite quickly. Um,
Yes.
cool. All right. Kelsey has a question. Tips for working with busy SMEs when you get into the nitty-gritty of final draft course reviews and feedback.
Well, it's an issue. I would say that I would say that I have a little bit of an advantage because what I would do is just either drive over or walk over and talk to them face to face. But I realize that that's not feasible for everyone. So I think that is where, number one, communicating the importance of it, um, and getting their buy-in early helps them be a little bit more communicative. But also, sometimes accountability is needed. Sometimes looping in people that can help them get moving is important. Um, and then also, I would just say that if you need to, maybe going back and reiterating what is the purpose of the course, how it's going to solve problems within their team, and being super, super clear about when you need what. So I think sometimes it's easy to make the mistake in communication. I know I started out with maybe a little bit more passive communication where I wasn't very specific about when I needed things. I just, when you get a chance, which is a
Mm.
terrible thing to say, don't ever say that. Instead of, I need this feedback by Monday at 5 p.m. and it's critical for this reason. Um, just the clarity is very important to getting what you need.
Okay, great. I'm looking ahead at some of these next questions. We got some good ones here. We're covering a lot of different bases, and we have about 12 minutes left. So I'm gonna try to send at least four more your way. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so question from Susan. Did you ever notice like a cultural issue in a department that might have been causing the performance problem, and how did you maybe approach something like that? Or maybe people, I'm guessing my take on that, like people maybe know what they're supposed to do, but maybe there's some other reasons why they're not doing it.
Yeah, I think that that's always going to be an element to where it's not necessarily a knowledge issue or a training issue. One of the things that goes up in the levels of training as you finish working with the processes and you finish working with the things that are more cut and dry, inevitably you get to things that are more soft skills. So when you get to the point where you need managers to address behavior, well, training can address that as well. And that's a different form of training, but it's training on management techniques, on holding people accountable, on connecting with their employees, and all sorts of things that are a different form of training, but training nonetheless. And so I think at that point, you're just kind of looking at addressing the problem a different way. So it may not be addressing the problem by the process, it may be addressing the problem by a behavior or a skill.
Nice. Okay, great. I have a question from Davis around AI. We haven't really gotten into AI. This is like the longest it's ever taken us to get. Well, I guess I mentioned it. Oh well. But Davis is wondering how AI has been integrating into your work, and how are you managing to keep up with AI's growing capabilities, as well as the daily grind of ID responsibilities.
I don't know that I'm managing to keep up with how fast it's growing, but I don't know that anyone is. I think that it has greatly increased the speed at which I can develop things. For example, some of the ways I've used it is to take some course content and have it develop knowledge check questions or quiz questions or discussion questions. Those types of things it's really good at, and it can do it so fast. Another thing that I've done is just develop some custom GPTs for questions that I come across a lot or topics that I address a lot. And that tends to save me a lot of time. I can even use it sometimes, depending on the topic, to supplement some information that SMEs give me. So if I'm not fully getting a picture, if there's some terms that I don't understand, I use it a lot to help me get a better grasp on that topic before I build the training. So, I mean, there's just so many ways, but yeah.
And do you want to talk about your dissertation at all?
Oh, sure. So my dissertation was focused on AI coaching. And what I explored was how AI coaching tools could help managers and salespeople develop their communication skills. And it was a very, very interesting topic to study. what I would say the biggest takeaway from that topic was that role play could be enhanced and accomplished by an AI coaching tool pretty well. And that doing that when the managers or the salespeople communicated with the AI coaching tool and it gave them objective feedback on a dashboard and it allowed them to role play multiple scenarios over and over again until they felt like they got it right. It did a lot to increase their confidence and also allow them to try some new things that they may not try in person because the risk is too high. And
Mm.
so it was just a very interesting topic to study.
Great, yeah, and as y'all can imagine, when Theresa told me about that, I was very interested because of what we've been doing with with like the AI role playing situations, like embedded in storyline courses and stuff like that. So it's been really cool hearing Theresa's perspective on these things. I want to try to get to a couple more questions at least, because y'all are asking good ones. Lisette is mentioning that some roles are asking for highly technical software skills, such as HTML, JavaScript, graphic design software. It blurs the lines between graphic/software design and instructional design. Is that where the field is headed?
I think it again depends on the company. I think
Mhm.
for me, that's not really where I've found my wheelhouse. I've found it more in integrating the learning opportunities with relationship building, with connection, with um, building peer mentorship programs, things like that. So I've leaned a little bit more, I would say, soft skill than hard skill,
Mhm.
but it depends on the role, depends on the company, what they're looking for and what they need.
Yeah, I think it's a diverse field to set. If you are drawn to that stuff, there's definitely opportunity for you. If you're drawn more to the side of it that Teresa's talking about, there will be opportunity for you on that side as well. I don't see the field converging on one of those sides anytime soon. I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity for both. A good question. All right. And then Stephanie wants to know how you knew the instructional design field was right for you. I mean, you mentioned designing those adult learning experiences. Stephanie, were you looking for any more depth there, or did you have any? Yeah, do you want to share any other details around that question? Or maybe you have some thoughts too, Teresa, you'd like to share.
I would say I really didn't know. I would say once I got into it and started doing it, I really fell in love with it. And I think there were a lot of scary unknown things when I first started, and among which was feeling kind of overwhelmed that there were so many things to tackle and not the time. But I think after I worked with my first department and just saw some real impact there. I think that's what kind of hooked me on it and really made me want to go full-fledged into as many things as I could learn about the field. So it's something that I think I knew that there were a lot of things that tied into teaching and how much I love that, but I really didn't know what it would be like day to day until I started doing it, but then I ended up loving it.
Yeah, I see how that would get really addicting, seeing the impact you're having and seeing that you're actually making a difference somewhere and people are trusting you to do it. So
Mhm.
it's like, okay, I kind of like this. Let's see what else we can accomplish here. And it seems like
Exactly.
your org appreciates it with, how you've been getting promoted and stuff. So very cool. Thanks for joining us for all of these questions. I'd like to share a little more behind the scenes with the people about, yeah, some people are following the journey. Some people here are in the new licensed academy. But when I did that video talking about how we got licensed, Teresa reached out almost immediately and mentioned wanting to help out and give back and help people who are making that career transition. So we had a nice long conversation where Teresa shared with me all of this amazing stuff she's been up to. And so hearing you even talk about it now, I'm so excited to like work on the instructional design project lab together. It mirrors this a lot. It's about improving like customer satisfaction for in like this immersive situation. So it'll be great to kind of be able to get your help as like a subject matter expert on that. And then we've been talking about collaborating in other ways too. I'm sure some more free content down the line, but also if you are in the bootcamp or academy, we'll do some like lecture series as well, where Teresa's going to keep sharing her insights that she's been learning over these past 4+ years. So great. I'm seeing the portfolio design requests. or the portfolio feedback live events. We'll have to put one of those on the books. And then if y'all are interested in like the teacher to corporate like language piece specifically, we might be able to dive deep on something like that. And we also have some requests to read your dissertation, Theresa.
Oh,
I don't know
great.
the best way for people to access that, but yeah.
Yep, I can do that. That sounds great.
All right. Well, thanks, Theresa. Let's all give a shout out to Theresa. Is it okay for people to connect with you on LinkedIn?
Of course, absolutely.
All right. We'll share the LinkedIn link as well, and we'll put that in the show notes on YouTube. So I have a lot of resources for you tomorrow when this replay goes live. This won't be the last you see of us, and we appreciate you all for coming and asking questions. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day, and thank you, Theresa.
Thank
Bye bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.